I think that allowing for the book being, after all, a parody, something like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. The sex instinct will be eradicated. We shall abolish the orgasm. There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the party. But always there will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
What's going on, everyone? It's Nina Infinity. Welcome to my channel on this Wednesday. This is Breaking the Narrative, and it's going to be an interesting one tonight, guys. I have a very, very cool guest with me, and he's waiting in the back, and I figured I'd take a moment to, first of all, say hello from this new background. Yes, I have a new background. I'm doing things, as you can tell. And this is going to be an interesting show. I've known Harrison, the author of this book that we're going to be talking about, for a long time. I've been following his work for a very long time. He is just a vast bundle of knowledge. He knows a lot of things. He is, I would say that he is a philosopher of sorts. He is a scholar, and now he's written this book called Beyond Disclosure, and it's a fascinating subject. I've always been fascinated by high strangeness, aliens, the beyond, all of the things, hyperdimensional beings, other dimensions, all of it. As you guys know, my name is Nina Infinity. That infinity is based on the concept of quantum physics and the idea of many, many, many versions of us, the infinite number of Nina Infinities that are in the universe, somewhere doing different things, alternate Ninas, if you will. So I figured it would be a really fun discussion to have Harrison on tonight. So welcome, Harrison Koehli. Hi, Harrison.
Hi, Nina.
Welcome.
It's good to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. This is kind of cool. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself. Tell them who you are, and all the things before we get into the topic.
All right. Well, I'll start with what I do currently. I've got two Substacks that I write on. The first is ponerology.substack.com, where I write about psychology and politics, and get into a little bit of philosophy, but ponerology is the study of evil. So I write about the study of political evil. Yep, that's the first edition of the book that I edited. So I edited the second edition that came out a few years ago now, and that's what I write about primarily on that one. And then I've got a second one, Cassiopeia.substack.com, with Cassiopeia with an A, and AEA instead of EIA. And that is the one where I published the articles that eventually became this book, and which will probably go on to become a second volume. And that one is a bit weirder. That's where I get into all of my weird paranormal stuff that I'm interested in. So it's primarily a compendium of a certain channeled source. We can talk about channeling, and but what I do is I basically took this 30-year long channeling experiment and went through like topic by topic on all the weird stuff, all the cool stuff that I'm interested in, like aliens and stuff, and arranged it by topic, and then added a whole bunch of other material from just the UFO and cryptozoological and other literature. So if there's a bit about abduction, I'll go into the sources and then just list a whole bunch of, you could call it like supporting evidence. Just I see it kind of as a history of ideas. So here's a bunch of weird ideas, and here's how they started, how long they've been around, and how they've developed in the years since this channeling experiment kind of introduced their take on it. So that's what I'm doing now. As for background, that's what I've been doing for a while. I've been doing the Ponerology. I've been doing the Ponerology Substack for 3 years now, but I've been writing about it in one form or another for over 10 years. Well, I guess it's almost 20 years now. I guess
Almost.
the first article I wrote about it was probably in around 2006, 2007 or something like that.
Yeah,
And,
it's so funny because
music.
this music, that's good. Music is good. I see that guitar in the back. Do you have a band? It should be.
I
you
did.
on
I don't.
Spotify?
No, I haven't had a band in like over 10 years, but
You still dabble.
too bad.
That's good.
Yep.
Yeah, but I was gonna say it's funny because one of the things we will talk about, you will understand this in a second, but the C's say there's no such thing as time, and I'm always like, there's no such thing as time, because I'm always forgetting that I'm like, the 90s weren't like 10 years ago now. I'm always like, oh my God, is it not 10 years ago anymore?
It's still the 90s in a certain sense,
It is somewhere. That's for sure. Well, how about let's start with how did you first become interested in the UFO topic at all? Like, how did you first get into it?
So that I was thinking about this. I did a live stream a couple of weeks ago where I was asked a similar question, and I had to kind of think about it and I'm pretty sure it traces back to when I was, I think, let's say around 9 years old, because that's when the X-Files started on TV, and I watched it every week with my family. So we watched the whole thing, like, starting at season 1. So we watched all, like, whatever original 9 seasons it was or something like that. So that was my first introduction to the topic, and of course I loved that show, and I still do. And I remember I was at the bookstore one day with my probably my mom, and I got a big hardcover UFO book on like top secret, like government UFO documents, and it had all kinds of declassified documents in it. I never actually read the book because I wasn't that into it, and it seemed kind of boring to actually read the documents, and I was only like 12 years old. But that was the start of it. So then, through my teen years, that's when I actually got more interested in it, as opposed to just watching about it on TV. So I actually started getting into all the kind of weird stuff that I'm still interested in. So, that was the first time I read Carlos Castaneda, probably at the age of 15 or something, and John Keel, like the Mothman prophecies, and then channeled material too. I was like, well, what's this channel stuff? That seems kind of interesting. Edgar Casey. So I got into all the weird stuff, like psi phenomena, the paranormal kind of stuff. And that's just been an interest. It's a waning interest. So, some years, there have been years where I didn't read anything on, the paranormal, and I stuck to, because I've got many interests, and but that one's been consistent, even if it's been consistently there, even if my interest wavers. But I've been really interested over the past few years, or the past few years, reading and then putting all the research in that would become this book.
Yeah, well, you're kind of archiving this too. So when you kind of become an archivist, it kind of goes to kind of with that, because you're just reading so much information. You're retaining so much information. So I guess the next question would be, how did you find Laura's work? And Laura, if you want to clarify who Laura is, Laura Knight Yachik, she is the channeler for this thing called the Cassiopean experiment. So maybe let's start there. So how did you get into Laura's work? How did you find Laura's work? And who is she, and who are the Cassiopeans?
Okay, this is going to be a very specific, an oddly specific way that I found this, and it's going to be. I'm guessing I'm probably the only one that this has happened to, just because it's nerdily specific. So I mentioned Edgar Cayce. So when I was a teenager, I was reading. I was interested in Edgar Cayce. I was interested in the idea of this, this psychic that would go into it. That seemed to have a good track record, that was acknowledged by many to be a genuine psychic of a sort, who went into these trances and channeled information from like the Akashic fields, and offered health readings and this weird alternative history about Atlantis and all this stuff. I mean, I could never know how much of that was true, but I found it interesting. So searching the internet, I spent a lot of time just doing probably Yahoo searches at the time. I don't know if Google was around yet.
Yeah, it was definitely Yahoo for me too.
So doing Yahoo searches and I found just through connections, I found the raw material, which was this channeled material from the 80s, 1980 and 1981. I can't remember what years the books were actually published, but that's the year that these people were active. So this was Don Elkins, Carla Ruckert, and Jim McCarty. And the three of them had this little group, and they'd get together and there's probably a whole backstory to that, but essentially it was a trance channeling thing where one day they'd been doing this sort of activity for years and years and years, and then one day I think Jim joined their little group, so it was now a trio, and then they sat down. Carla went into her trance, and this new source kind of started speaking through her, and it was very different than all the other ones. It was slow, deliberate, and if you read it, like I would say that the writing or the composition of the sentences that came through Carla was probably much more complex and almost like coming from a person with a higher IQ than all three of them, and using words that none of them knew. They had to look them up in the dictionary or didn't even know what the word was, but you check it out and it's just this obscure word. So there was something interesting going on with that, and I just found that stuff immensely interesting and fascinating. A weird new cosmology, talked about aliens in a way that I'd never heard before. And so but what happened was that tragically, Don Elkins, after these 2 years, they stopped the channeling at a certain point, because his mental health just went down the tubes. He went into like a severe depression and ended up killing himself. Yeah. And so that was the end of that. And
I was going to ask you about that. Like, do you know, not like kind of like the reason, because I don't think anyone really knows the reason why he did it, but do you think it was, let's just say, like high strangeness was involved?
Well, that's definitely possible. Of course, I can't know, like from the framework that they were living in. So this is the kind of stuff that they believed, and this kind of stuff that kind of came through in their own channeling. Again, who knows if this is true or not, but the worldview that they were operating in was that there are beings, like you might call them demons, or these like hyperdimensional beings, the so-called aliens that Ra was talking about, that they identify people who, it's kind of like the Matrix. They identify people who are bringing information that exposes those types of beings to the world and works to neutralize them.
Right.
And they called it a form of like psychic greeting or psychic attack. And so for several months, if you read through these sessions, they're talking about this. They're talking about the struggles that they've been having, and that there was this being that was basically attached to them, and or kind of targeting them and trying to get at them in certain ways. And this might be emotional, interpersonal, or even even through accidents. And so from that worldview, I would say that, well, from within that worldview, the way they might see it was that Dawn was under like an intense psychic attack and didn't have the knowledge to be able to deal with it, to fight it.
Right.
Of course, again, that's just I can't say whether any of that's true or not.
Sure.
Just that's yeah.
The other question I
how
had
we see it.
about specifically about the raw material, though, because you do go a little bit into it into the book about it, because you have excerpts from the raw material, which is their book was called The Law of One. They and we're going to get into this more, guys, so just bear with us, but because we're going to be talking about the Cassiopean experiment, and you have to explain that first. But I believe there's a difference, though, between how they conducted their experiment versus the Cassiopean experiment, which I believe uses a Ouija board. I don't think the raw guys use that. I have the raw guys as like my thing now. But no, I don't think like that's like their name of their band, the Raw Guys. Like I don't think the Law of One used that. I think that she was specifically she was the instrument, from what I understand. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, no. So they were an example of pure like trance channeling. So this is when Carlo would go into a full trance, and according to the kind of, I guess, spiritualist interpretation, she left her body, and then her vocal cords were then controlled by another entity.
Creepy.
So
that's so creepy.
That's the way it's. That's at least the theory or interpretation for what's going on in a case like that. We can talk a little bit about channeling in general. I think I will after I finish this little story.
Sure.
So anyways, so I was into that. I was sad that it had ended and that there was no more to read from those guys. So as just a tiny bit more background, the way that Ra presented their cosmology, the way the world works, is in a series of densities. So they called the world that we live in third density. The second density, it's like levels of consciousness almost. So a second density would be like animals and plants, and then first density would be just like rocks and minerals and the moon.
Earth.
So the Earth, but the Earth without any DNA on it.
Organic
so basically
life.
rocks,
Like it's
organic life.
Yeah.
And so then there was like there are levels above that. So fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh density, which is kind of like the unification of the whole. I mean, that's going to be that's going to be a future project, is putting together just a description of that whole cosmology from the Cassiopean perspective. But anyway, so
I think that would be good. It would be helpful. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So the Ra claimed that they were sixth density beings. So I was like, okay, so I'm not going to get to read any more Ra. So I was Yahoo searching, basically if I would have put it into ChatGPT today, I would have said, so are there any other sixth density like beings being channeled that I could read? So that's essentially what I searched. And I found there were two sources. I can't remember what the other one was, because I kind of like, I was like, okay, I'm going to read one or the other, and I chose the Cassiopeians. And I'm like, okay, well that's cool, and I totally forgot what the other one was. And so that's the reason I found it, because I was specifically looking for a sixth density channeled source, whatever that is, right?
Is very specific.
Yes, very specific. And so I just started reading, and then I read everything at that point, and just found it very interesting, because I should say that while I'm interested in channeling, I'm not really a fan of channeling. There's a ton of it, and I would say like the vast majority of it, I just can't even read it. I find it to be boring, repetitive, flowery, and not very believable. And so I'd put the majority of channeling in that, in that bucket. I'm just not very impressed by most of it. The raw material impressed me. There's a history. There's a handful of channels that I found interesting. and worth reading. So Cassiopeians is the main one, and it's cool because they're still going. One that I haven't got into, but that I also think is worth reading. I plan on getting and reading more of it. Is Marshall Summers's Allies of Humanity. That one seems interesting because he's got an unpopular take on like aliens and all that sort of thing. Because
I have not even heard of this one. Which one is this called? Allies of Humanity?
Allies of Humanity. And he's been around for like around 25 years or something. I think that's when he first published, like late 90s. Maybe,
What's the guy's
probably
name
even
again?
earlier than that. Marshall, I'm not sure how to pronounce the middle name, Vian, Vian Summers.
Okay, I have to look them up
Allies
later.
of Humanity.
Okay.
Yeah, because he's unpopular because he basically says that you can't trust any aliens and that aliens are bad news, basically. And the vast majority of channeling, again, is like, oh, I'm channeling this reptilian or this gray, and they're totally great, and we have this loving relationship, and that's kind of like that's not what you find in the raw material, the Cassiopeian material, or the Allies of Humanity. It's like, and that's one of the things that kind of attracted me to it, is because it seemed a lot more realistic, and it touched on some disturbing subject matter that most people seem to ignore. And I like dark music, you know, and I like disturbing things. You know, I'm actually a really lighthearted person in real life, but I like researching like psychopathy, you know, like for ponerology. And dark stuff. So I was kind of fascinated by the dark interpretation of what's really going on with you know, aliens and cryptids and all that sort of thing.
It's funny. He can't trust aliens. Duh. Yeah. Look, I don't trust Amita. I'm gonna say it right now. I don't trust those bastards. I never have. And I've had my own situations rise up throughout my life where I've, you know, been like, okay, like there's definitely something going on, and it certainly doesn't seem friendly. So I'm on they're not the good guys team. Now I do think that there may be good guys, but we just we don't necessarily interact with them as much as we wish we would. I think the majority of our Earth in this plane of existence, I think it's run by very, very dark, very, very dark situations. Not people. Well, people work with them as well. So it's a very complicated situation. But let's expand on this. So we've gotten to the Cassiopeian experiment now. So let's talk about that and your introduction to it. What is it? And all the players involved, specifically Laura, because I guess she is the main channeler of the Cassiopeian experiment. But I believe she started out as a professional hypnotherapist, correct?
Yeah, well, she did a lot of things before that, before this started in 1994. So at the time, I believe she was a hypnotherapist, professional, and so she was working in that capacity. The story that kind of leads up to that, she's got a ton of books where she tells the story. Probably the best one to start out with, if you're interested in the background, would be her book called Amazing Grace. It's an autobiography, so it's got all of her early life leading up to 1994. And just to kind of like briefly summarize the relevant bits, is that she too was interested in the paranormal from an early age. You know, realized and had concluded that there was something to it, and wanted to essentially try it out. She had a goal in mind for what she wanted to achieve in engaging in a channeling experiment. So she'd read like all the books on spiritualism and psychical research from like the 19th century, and then all of the kind of ideas about and examples of channeling in the 1900s. So, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s. And so she decided to try it out. And she didn't want, she was never a fan of the trance channeling, because she, I believe, you know, if I'm remembering correctly, didn't like the aspect of essentially leaving your body open to who knows who, right? What
Being
kind of control do you have
possessed,
over that?
for
Right,
lack of a
exactly.
better word, that's basically kind of what happens.
Yeah, you've got to have a lot of faith in that process and in the being that comes in, and it might not always be who you want it to be, right? If that's what's actually going on. So she basically decided on using a variation on a Ouija board, a spirit board. So it's kind of like a Ouija board. This principle is the same. It's a board. In this case, it's got a circle with all the letters and numbers, and then kind of like yes and no. So the principle is the same. It uses a planchette, and more than one person sits at the board, and then they sit down, put their hands on the planchette, ask some questions. And for anyone that's kind of skeptical about like, I can understand a bunch of different skeptical responses to who have never heard of such a thing, or who have just heard, here and there what goes on with a Ouija board. But whatever you think about the idea of channeling and whether there are actual entities engaging, the process itself is real, in the sense that that when you're at the board. Now, I'm not speaking from experience. I haven't experimented in this, but I've done research on it, and I've engaged with people who have, right? So when you're at the board and your hands, you and another person, maybe 3 or 4 people, and your hands are all on there, you have no perception that you are moving it. If you're a skeptic, you are convinced that the other people are moving it. If they're all skeptics, everyone is convinced everyone else is doing it and not themselves.
That would be, I'd be like so skeptical. Yeah. I'd be like, who's doing this? Like, what is going on?
Right. Right. And so there was this spiritualist guy from the, anyway, he was also like an astronomer, I think, Alan Kardec. And in the late 1800s, early 1900s, he wrote a bunch of just really cool books on mediumship and parapsychology, as it came to be called. But he called this a form of physical automatism. Basically, when your body's doing something and you're not aware of controlling it, it's basically an unconscious process. Maybe a rough analog would be what you might experience in a massage or like a body therapy type thing, where it's called unwinding. I've had this once where the therapist will start a movement in your arm or another limb, and then it's as if you have no control of it and your arm is just moving on its own. It's a weird sensation, but as an example of this, in using a spirit board or a Ouija board, this will always stick to me. I read about a study that was done in the lab on in a scientific lab on this, and the way they set it up was to have a screen between 2 people at a Ouija board. And so each person then put their hand on the planchette, the little disc that goes between letters, and it was set up in such a way that they couldn't see the other person's hand. So, but they knew that someone was there. Like, I think maybe they could see each other's faces or something. But so the part of the test was that, like most of these lab tests, one of them was a conspirator, working with the experimenters. And so it would start out, and it would just be the real process, right? Like the Ouija board would be seemingly just moving on its own. Neither of them is controlling it, but the test subject is like, okay, the other person's totally just controlling that. I'm not doing it. And then, unbeknownst to them, the other person would remove their hand. And it would still be moving, and the test subject would be convinced that the other person was still touching it and still moving it, totally unaware that they were actually they were the only person touching it.
Right? Oh, that's trippy. Yeah, that's cool.
Right. So that's what the experience of it is like. Now, the nature of it is a whole philosophical question on the nature of reality and what's actually going on in these experiments. Is it just like a subconscious process, like automatic writing? Is it really another like external consciousness external to one's own that's interacting with or communicating with you? Is it some kind of unconscious process? Is it more of like an accessing of some like non-physical information field that just kind of disguises itself or takes the form of another intelligence when it's just like contacting the cosmic internet? Or is it actually just another being, and this is just one way of talking with them? Those are all like open questions as far as humans are concerned, because we have no way of knowing for sure. But but it probably helps. No, it definitely does help in experiments of this sort. If you're approaching them as semi-skeptical, it helps to, as I put it, I put it this way in another live stream, and I'll do it again, is that it helps to suspend disbelief but be skeptical at the same time. So for instance, this is what they did in the so-called Philip experiment. So these were a bunch of guys and ladies and gentlemen, in, I believe it was either the 70s or the 80s, and they too were engaged in this channeling experiment, but they set out to create a personality. So they created a personality. They wrote a biography. They gave this guy a name all before they started. And so they had this character that they created, and then they tried to contact this specific creation, and it worked, you know.
Whoa.
But so it raises the question of who were they really contacting? Because I can't remember if they used a board, I can't remember the means by which they engaged in this, but it would basically answer questions as if this character was real, and as if he had the history that they'd given him and all this sort of stuff. So
Wow.
it was either a creation of all of the individuals themselves, in which case it was this weird subconscious process, or it was a being that had a consciousness that had adopted that personality and was basically pretending to be that personality, or it was like the creation of a personality that had those features, or the list of possibilities is probably endless. The Cassiopeans had their own interpretation of that specific experiment, which I include in the book. But
wait, what
all
did
that
they
just
say? You can't, you got to tell me what it was. What did they say it was?
Sorry, my internet's bad, and so I got like robo voice when you were saying that. Did you just ask me what they said about it?
Yeah, what did they say about it?
Okay, so this was in the context of a discussion on the concept of egregors, which is this idea that it's this occult idea. Mark Stavish wrote a book about it called just Egregors, I think, and the idea is that an individual, a group of people creates a higher intelligence that acts as a kind of god, but it's a bottom-up creation. So we create, like, what would an example be? Like, well, there might be an egregor for a country, and it has a certain number of characteristics, and it informs the mentality of the people of that country or that nation. And so there was a discussion, a whole session devoted to the question of egregors, and the C's answer was basically that it doesn't really work that way. You don't create a consciousness that is higher. You might, there are some tiny exceptions, and I'd just say for people to read the book for those. But the big picture is that what actually happens is that is like in the Philip experiment. I think I can't remember exactly what they said, but I think they basically said that it was a being that just kind of was hanging around and filled the hole that they'd created for him. So it's like, okay, I'll be that guy.
It kind of reminds me of the earlier parts of your book where you're talking about that witch, the witch entity,
the Bell Witch,
the Bell Witch. And they like that thing creeped me out because guys, I will tell you this: when you read this book, try and read it in the day, because it's creepy. Like, some of the stuff in it is really, really creepy. So this Bell Witch creature, like, I was wondering even like what I didn't understand, because it took itself, it manifested itself as different creatures at first, and then it started talking to them later on. And I didn't understand, like, if this entity that was talking to them had already taken a form of like a human being at that point, or was it like, it was an energy that was kind of psychically telling them what was going on. Like, I didn't quite grasp what that was. Like, it was weird.
I haven't read the original accounts. This happened in I think it was like the 1800s sometime.
Yeah, it was
US,
like 1837 or something. That was crazy.
And I think they just heard a disembodied voice. I don't think it had like fully materialized, but they would see like weird, kind of like Skinwalker Ranch. They'd see weird creatures, and things like that. But I'm pretty sure it was just a disembodied voice, but I don't know for sure.
It was so
But
creepy because it was saying like that like it would do because the guy was he invited his preacher friend over, and then the guy would say like prayers and stuff because they thought maybe it's like a demon or something, like, let's extinguish this demon, let me like say some hymns and blah blah blah, and it starts replicating the guy's voice and like singing like the most beautiful hymns that they've ever heard, and it was saying like there was like transcripts where like that account was talking about how they like it started to know the deepest, darkest thoughts and telling different people about what was going on in people's lives. Like, this person's having an affair with this other person. Did you know that? Like, so people started actually like behaving better in their communities because they were like, I don't want this voice to tell my secrets to these other people. And that stuff was just wild. I was, and I'm totally getting off topic because we still have to explain what the Cassiopeans are exactly. But so let's get back on that track. I just totally like derailed it, but go on with the rest of this explanation.
Okay. So we went over it's a board type instrument.
Yeah, it's a board type instrument.
So
Laura's interested, and she decided she's going to experiment with this. Go ahead.
So she basically knew what she didn't want, and she knew that there would be a process that it would start, and it would be essentially boring. So she knew that would happen, that she would start on the board and she would get a whole bunch of communications claiming to be people and beings, and maybe a space brother here, a dead dude there, and that was just part of the process, because she essentially wanted to do something like the raw material to try to get that bump in the quality of a source. And so that eventually happened after, I don't know how many years she was doing it before 94, but yeah, so she hasn't published this just because it's not worth publishing, but a bunch of contacts just with, again, alleged beings claiming to be discarnate spirits or ascended masters or whatever, just a bunch of saying whatever, and so she just wanted to get past all that to see what could happen. And so eventually, I kind of like with the raw material, one day something just felt different, and the words came in a different fashion, and it just that there was a different quality to what had what was coming through. And well, just to I didn't finish a previous thought when I said basically suspension of disbelief. So that's how I got into the Philip experiment, is that if you're approaching this semi-scientifically, not as kind of a true believer that's just going to take everything that comes through, the way I like to put it is that you have to kind of, on the one hand, suspend your disbelief and like have the conversation. So you might not actually believe you're talking with a dead dude, but you can engage in the conversation, but don't necessarily believe it. And then that's the second half, is to have a kind of skepticism at the same time. But you're probably not going to have it's not going to succeed if you are either totally skeptical and not willing to actually engage and at least play with the process and have the conversation. And on the other hand, if you're just a total true believer, then it's kind of like trance channeling, where you just kind of open yourself up, and it's like anything might come in. And that's there's a kind of aspect of self-protection and retaining the integrity of your own mind. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So she started with some friends in she'd started before then, but in 1994 is when this started, and has been doing it for almost 31 years now, on it, with more regularity in the early years.
Do you know why they're called the Cassiopeans?
That's just what they said. So in that first session, and practically all the sessions after that, I said, okay, well, who are you? And they give some usually Greek sounding name, just like a combination of Greek sounding phonemes, like Alomianopia or something like that, or Alomianaya, or blah blah blah, and then, well, where are you from? And they'd say from Cassiopeia, and spelled that weird way with a AEA, and at least they claim, or the source or whatever's coming through this board claims, that that's just basically the cosmic direction that they're coming from, that there's a some kind of, what is it, like a pulsar or something, some kind of high energy star in that region, or some kind of cosmic explosion that acts as a kind of energy,
like a conduit
transceiver, or conduit. And that so it's basically just a reference to an area of the sky, and there might be some kind of physical process going on, but who knows.
Do you because I also know from because I find Laura, I think she's fascinating. So I know that she's also married to a physicist who I believe is very prominent in his field, Yajic. And he also contributes to this experiment, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So he joined on, I think, in 1996 or ish. And they ended up getting married, and he's been a part of it for, so maybe there were a lot of sessions in those first few years that that he wasn't involved in, but he's been a part of it ever since. And he's a world-class physicist, mathematical physicist. He's the co-author and creator of what they called event enhanced quantum theory, which is a kind of new interpretation of quantum theory. He did that 20 plus years ago, and does a whole bunch of stuff that I don't understand, because I do not understand math.
I mean, I never understand anything he says, barely, but I find it though fascinating, because I think one of the things that really, just blew my mind about her, and just generally speaking, like their experiment, was that he was involved. And he is in the scientific field. So this isn't just one of those things where you have a woman like just being like, well, I just want to contact dead dudes, and like, just being like a girly, and like just being like, I just want to have like a Ouija party or whatever. There is a very tangible scientific experiment going on where this gentleman Ark is contributed to, and he's very much involved in keeping track of this scientific experiment. And that's why I think it's even more fascinating, because it kind of adds that extra oomph to it, because it's not something like it's just mumbo jumbo. There is something going on where very intelligent individuals are putting this under a microscope and kind of analyzing it, and then doing research to confirm what has happened. And you are part of that now. Like you yourself is also part of that, because that is what it takes, because it's not, it's not going to be just one or two people kind of doing this, right? It's going to take a team of people to do this, and you're part of that team. And I think that's what's really fascinating about it, is that the idea that you guys are archiving and kind of cross-referencing and kind of really going at it from that scientific perspective, versus it just being just kind of aloofness. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if you want to expand on that scientific experiment part of it.
Yeah. So I mentioned I was kind of slightly derogatory to other channeled material and other channelers earlier, right? And it's because if you read most channeled books, it's just, here's the channeled material, here's the teachings from on high, and that can be okay, but me personally, I'm more interested in, like you said, the kind of dynamic process of, well, here's some information. Oh, well, is it true? Or like, might it be true? Maybe I can't tell if it's true. Maybe it's just interesting. But I like a process of at least engaging with it to try to establish at least some level of plausibility for certain things. Because like in any parapsychological experiment, there are going to be hits and misses. Sometimes it's just going to be chance, but you're definitely going to get misses. Like you're going to get an answer that comes through that's just like, oh, well, that's obviously wrong. But sometimes you might think something's obviously wrong until you find out a few years later, oh, maybe that was actually right. So that sometimes happens too. But again, you need to engage with it in an open but critical manner. And I find that to be fun and fulfilling. It's just a cool thing to do. Just kind of, that's the way that's what I appreciated about it. And that's kind of why I did the book in the way I did. I'd add one more motivation because the first chapters are kind of just about paranormal stuff in general, but then it's into some kind of highly specific, like UFO and alien related stuff.
Yeah.
Whether it's underground bases, alien abduction, cattle mutilations, that kind of thing. And like I wrote in the introduction, we've been having this whole, like for the last several years, and really in the last 2 years, this kind of disclosure push, like a bunch of people really pushing to try to get UFO disclosure from the federal government. And we've got like a multi-pronged approach from private organizations, private individuals, Congress, the Senate. And as I put it in the introduction, the public is in a weird position because there's a lot of information available, but no human really, no average citizen has the ability to just look at all the information and say, well, that's true, that's false, and to be able to create an accurate picture of what's going on. Now, I'm like 99% certain that at least for a lot of the questions, the government does have some answers. Maybe not all the answers, maybe not totally satisfactory answers, but they have some of the answers. Like they at the very least know, what is true and what they've released as disinformation, right? There's some basic level of information that they have that the public doesn't have. And when you're put in a position of not having access to the information you need to form a proper conclusion about things, well, you can do what the U.S. military and intelligence agencies did. You can turn to a paranormal source. That's exactly what the military did, and the CIA and a whole bunch of other agencies in the 70s and 80s and 90s with the Stargate program, right? With remote viewing. Joseph McMonigal, I mean, he won an intelligence award for the work that he did with remote viewing, because in the absence of available sources of intelligence, what they did was they said, well, let's just get some psychics to, freaking remote view that shit and try to find it that way. And it worked a lot of the time. To the point where they were getting their services were getting repeatedly requested by multiple intelligence agencies and arms of the military and even private industry. So I mean, remote viewing works. It did work for the government. They're like, I'm pretty certain they still do it. They just don't have an official program because they had to shut it down because of the press surrounding it. But so when you don't have an accurate, or when you don't have a reliable and available source of on the ground intelligence, you can turn to a paranormal means to at least try to get an idea, which then can be, like with the remote viewing, tested. So when they would remote view something, they would be like, okay, well, we didn't have a source of intelligence for this, so now let's go looking. So like Jimmy Carter famously outed part of this program when he said that one of the greatest parts of his presidency was when some psychic, basically they were looking for a downed Russian plane in Africa, and she looked at the map, circled like a 3-mile square area, and they found the plane there. No one knew where it was.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So then you can try to verify it. So that's kind of what I'm kind of trying to do here. Of course, it's impossible to verify for sure, but you can look through all of the research, all of the literature, all the publicly available stuff, and at least create a picture that put it all together in such a way that you can look at it and say, okay, well, this might be an explanation for it. How does it square up against all these other sources? Like, is it at least plausible? Maybe it sounds crazy, but again, is it maybe plausible? Because when you look at a bunch of other people that seem to be credible in let's say positions that would lend them some sort of perhaps authority on the subject, when they're saying similar things, then it's like, well, maybe this is a plausible picture. And it's something
Yeah.
that's, so I mean, it's tricky when you're dealing with something that's so unknown, but that's what makes it fun, is it's a mystery.
It's fascinating.
Solve that mystery. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that's why it's also really interesting to me with the raw material and the Cassiopeans. I feel like there's a lot of similarities there, even though it's a completely different type of channel, and a complete different source of material, but they kind of really spoke to some of the same elements, like the densities that you spoke of before.
Yep.
Certain, because the Cassiopeans also, I believe they say that they do they also say that they transmit from sixth density, like Ra does. Yeah, and
Yep.
things like that. There's just certain similarities that are really fascinating. And then when you kind of put the two and two next to each other, you're just like, oh, there's just different sources, but they're saying the same thing. And then you can go verify even further, especially if they're talking about specific things that happen in history, for example. Like, you can kind of pinpoint certain things, and it makes a real. I mean, that kind of just blows my mind constantly. Real quick, I want to get the super chat here. Thank you, Test Site, for the $10. As I would stay longer. I'm really enjoying the show. Great job, but I got to work tomorrow. You mentioned channeling, though. Alex Jones has brought up some scary stuff on channeling. Do you have any comments about Alex Jones's takes on channeling?
Well, I haven't heard what he said about channeling, but I mean, I'd agree. This is like any kind of paranormal thing. It's risky. And like I mentioned with the trance channeling, you don't know what you're going to get. And that's one of the, that comes to one of the reasons why Laura used the board, is that as, she believes that it offers a kind of barrier, a kind of distance between the people engaged and the whatever they're channeling. And of course, like it, just to kind of use an extreme example, one form of extreme, if you're, it would be as if like a total skeptic engaging in this and having this conversation, and then just being able to say, okay, none of that was real, and then just forget about it. Like, I would say that there probably isn't much psychological risk to that individual, if they have that much of a barrier. Now, maybe I'm actually probably wrong on that there, but I think it would be a risk of a different sort. But so I'd say that just like with any kind of paranormal pursuit, there are going to be dangers. And it's just it's the same thing in the UFO field right now with summoning UFOs and and CE5, like Stephen Greer. Like a lot of people are thinking that that's a good idea. It might not be such a good idea, but at the very least, if someone's going to do it, they should jump into it with like a full as full a possible knowledge base that they can acquire. So you should go into it knowing what you're getting into, and having some idea of the risks involved, and basically being careful about it. And
I mean, I've been like that too, meaning like, and by that, I mean, I'm very skeptical of this kind of stuff, but at the same time, I find it fascinating. And I think that like, Alex probably does have very good points, just like what you brought up, because there is a very dangerous, very real aspect to it that could lead to, like, I mean, we started out the show talking about how the one of the main Raw guys ended up, ending himself. So there is certain things that are very scary, very like, and maybe even the aspect of how close you get to the truth, and when those entities maybe don't want you to get to that aspect of the truth, or however you want to put it. And there is going to be certain things that try to stop you. And you even mentioned this in the book, and talk about that as, for example, like the MIB. You talk about the very famous kind of thing that happened even with the UFOs, and like what happened with the people who've had experiences, and how they kind of come in contact with these certain individuals who people believe might be from the government, and they come to kind of assess the situation and deter them from ever explaining anything. But then you kind of go deeper into that subject, and it starts to become, again, way more scary than the government coming to your door. So maybe let's start there. We've started already, but let's continue with this discussion into the next topics. And again, thank you, Test Site, for the $10. And also thank you, Raider, for the very massive super chat. You didn't say anything, but I really appreciate you. And also Dan A gifted 5 memberships. Thank you so much for the support, you guys. But let's continue the conversation into the different topics that you discuss in this book. And one of them is hyperdimensional beings, I guess, or is that the accurate term to put for these creatures, whatever they are?
Yeah, for some I'd think. Again, this would depend on an entire cosmology, but the basic idea is that because people use a lot of these words, sometimes meaninglessly, sometimes interchangeably, interdimensional, hyperdimensional, intradimensional, other dimensional. There are probably several other ones, but the basic idea is just that there are other probably the easiest way to put it is just other realms, other realities that intersect with our own in certain ways. And that would be, kind of like a fourth dimensional barrier that you can't see. And this would go back to the kind of allegory that or metaphor that Edwin Abbott used in his book Flatland, 100 and something years ago. This idea of if our world were a piece of paper and we were 2-dimensional beings, then a third dimensional being comes and interacts with us. Well, we would only be able to see what's in front of us, on a page as a circle. And then if the third dimensional being comes and pushes his finger on the paper, there's a circle, right? But the 2-dimensional being doesn't have any idea of the 3-dimensionality of the creature and interacting with him. And so the idea that there could be hyperdimensional beings that would be 4-dimensional in nature, that would interact in our world in such a way as when they would interact or when they would intersect with our world, they would appear 3-dimensional, but in reality, they have kind of the features of a hypothetical 4-dimensional being. And there was a physicist that wrote a great book back in the 80s or 90s. I think it was just called The Fourth Dimension. And I can't remember his name, but it's just a great little scientific book. And he talks about theories of other dimensions, higher dimensions, and I think even Michio Kaku wrote in one of his books on hypothetical, what a hypothetical 4-dimensional being would be like, and the kind of powers it might have, and the way we would perceive it.
Isn't it kind of also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like Albert Einstein near the end of his life came to the idea that there was a 5th dimension, and that it's possible that we could be basically kind of getting, like, he called it the 5th dimension because it was, I mean, obviously it's different. But he also kind of got to that point where it was like, oh, maybe this is not the only plane, and then there's a higher one or a different density, if you will, or however you want to explain that.
Yeah. The way I understand that, not being a physicist, is that that was a part of the, like, Einstein, well, the Kaluza-Klein hypothesis or theory, and that hypothesized, or that entailed a 4th spatial dimension, which they called the 5th dimension because physicists count time as a dimension. So they'd say we already live in a 4-dimensional universe. So the higher spatial dimension would be a 5th dimension. So when I say the 4th dimension, I'm talking about a 4th spatial dimension. So I believe it was in the Kaluza-Klein theory that that entailed the reality of a 4th spatial dimension or a 5th dimension. And I don't know if Einstein speculated on what the implications of that were, or the what that might imply. I don't think so, but it's possible.
Yeah.
But at the very least, it was at the very least, it was, he was actually saying that if the way I understand it, if this theory is true, if this holds up, then there is a real 4th spatial dimension, and that might entail real 4th dimensional beings.
Right. And that's, I guess, and that leads to this hyperdimensional being, and how you were discussing in the book for example, that the famous Men in Black or the MIB
Mhm.
are kind of like projections of these creatures because they can't manifest themselves in our world physically. So therefore, they kind of, in a way, the only kind of way I can understand it, because I'm such a nerd and I like Star Trek. I kind of think of it as a hologram, like it's a hologram
Mhm.
creature that they kind of manifest, but they can't kind of really do it well. So that's why they kind of look weird, like they have longer fingernails, or like they just like, or not fingernails, fingers, and they kind of
Mhm.
look weird, and they act differently, and they act kind of bizarre, as if they're not really people, they're just kind of there. So
Mhm.
that's I found that part fascinating, because all of these things have been kind of put in our world, like through pop culture, like even like the famous Men in Black. We've been exposed to these kind of ideas for a really long time. It's just we don't know how close those things are to the
Yeah.
actuality of what may be occurring on our planet. Because, and I think in a way that might be a way that they, another program where they want to like dissociate people or dissuade people from really looking deeply into it by making it all silly and like, oh, it's all silly and fun, and if aliens were here, don't worry, we take care of you guys because the government wants the best for you. We always want the best for you, right? Like, the government, the government, as if the government's ever done anything good for people. Like, as if the government's ever wanted the best for people, like realistically. So I just think that part of it is funny, but maybe you can expand a little bit more on these hyperdimensional beings versus the other kinds of beings that you talk about in the book, which are kind of like the zoo. What was it? I was like zoology,
Crypto. Yeah.
cryptozoology, cryptozoology, which is,
Uh-huh.
things like Bigfoot and fairies and all sorts of other weird creatures like that. The chupacabra, like the famous creatures that most people have heard of. The Mothman, which is the craziest one to me. That thing freaks me out. I remember watching that movie like when it first came out with Richard Gere. See, that was a good movie because it didn't really make fun of the situation. It was very
Yeah.
creepy, kind of like really putting forth exactly what happened. And I find those things really interesting. So let's go into that aspect of it. Like, what's the difference between these hyperdimensional beings and these kind of projections versus these other creatures, aka also known as window fallers?
Mhm. So I put this stuff first to kind of, but one, because it's interesting, and two, to get it out of the way so I didn't have to come back to it later. So this basically the first part is all of the not aliens. I wanted to get rid of all the not aliens before I got to the aliens. And
Sure.
so, because there's a whole ecology of beings in this channeled material. And so you mentioned window fallers. So so all the things I'll talk about first are not aliens. And
Okay, not aliens, guys. Not aliens. Okay.
so the idea, various, Laura asked all kinds of questions about all kinds of paranormal stuff. And so she asked about all kinds of cryptids, cryptozoological experiences and sightings. So like Loch Ness monster, Bigfoot, you mentioned them. Chupacabras, the Bell Witch, the Spring Heel
Velvet,
Jack,
creepy.
the Beast of Gévaudan from France in the 1700s. I can't remember.
The Slender
And
Man. That thing's
Slender
creepy as
Man, yeah.
fuck.
I mean, shadow people. There's tons of them, right?
Mhm.
And basically all kinds of monsters and things that go bump in the night. And the answer was pretty consistent for most of those things that I just listed. And they say, well, those are window fallers. And it's like, okay, well, what's a window? So John Keel wrote about what he called window areas. These are areas where it seems like the barriers between worlds are kind of break down a bit, and a bunch of things come through. And so that's why, and the Seas had the same idea that this was something that fell through a dimensional window. And a window area can be the result of, well, usually is the result of geology, some kind of specific feature of the area involved. It might have something to do with, we can get into missing 411 cases, talk about that later in the book. But
Mhm.
granite, certain features of certain rocks, and waterways, geomagnetic anomalies. That there's something about electromagnetism and the electromagnetic signature of a certain area that seems to create a paranormal hotspot. And we have these hotspots, and we hear about them on the History Channel and all over the place, like Skinwalker Ranch. These will be, or Hudson Valley or San Luis Valley. These are people or places where there seem to be a concentrated number of paranormal events and sightings over a period of time, or condensed into one period of time, where you'll find things like cattle mutilations, monster sightings, UFO sightings, psychic kind of stuff going on, and they seem to all happen and all be concentrated in a certain area. And so the Seas say that a lot of these beings that people see, they're basically temporary manifestations from some other world, like almost like an imaginal realm. If you think about almost like that there's this realm of pure possibility, and when a window opens, it's like almost like a quantum collapse, and some kind of being will come through and manifest itself temporarily. And the Seas say that these types of beings, they kind of like you were saying about Men in Black, but it's a different category, is that they only exist here temporarily, maybe for as long as the window's open, whatever that means, and that they need a certain energy in order to be able to stay here for that period of time, and that might be like an emotion of fear. So if you look at a lot of the cryptid sightings, it's like they're scary things. That's why we call them monsters. So there's some kind of terrifying experience with this being. It might be a being that looks like a dog man, or Slender Man or something, some terrifying form, but that is like evanescent, like it's not totally in this world, and it might, it's here and then it's gone. John Keel writes about this, and how with a lot of these so-called monster sightings, it'll happen in this area in a town, and it'll happen repeatedly, and the townsfolk will get together a posse to go after it, and of course they never find anything. Or when they find it, they try shooting at it, and the bullets do nothing. The bullets just kind of bounce off, and then the beings just disappears.
Yeah, and I was just trying to look up. There was a picture that you had put in the book. I was trying to find it. They had there's a famous picture of that little demon thing that was like in the cave.
Yeah, the Cheddar Cave.
Yeah, and I have the digital version, and I don't have my thing on me, but if you have it, here, I can blow it up. There we go. Yeah, that thing. It's creepy.
It's a controversial photo, and it's kind of out of this, but it's controversial because, like a lot of paranormal stuff, it's been debunked. The question is whether the debunking is genuine or not, because if you accept the reality of these things and accept that there's a certain high level of classification on a lot of these details, if something real that the government would consider classified and not want to be out there, then if something real is either leaked or just shows up, they're going to try to discredit that. And one of the ways to discredit it is to create a scenario where it looks like it was a hoax. So it creates this insane kind of like spy versus spy world, where you never know if something's true or a hoax, or a hoax that's actually true, or it becomes totally impossible to sort out, right? So with this photograph showed up, I can't remember, it showed up in some year, and people were like, oh no, this is actually a sculpture at the Cheddar Caves in the UK, and they've got a whole bunch of little imp statues. So how do you rebunk? So I'm going to try to rebunk this. Who knows if it'll work? But so at the time, Laura was actually interested in this because it was in a Fortean Times or a Fate magazine article or something, and so she emailed them, and the one of the PR people at Cheddar Cave said, well, no, this is a great sculpture, but it's not one of ours. And so there were examples of photographs of some of the sculptures, which are kind of similar looking, and but it wasn't until 10 years later that a Turkish debunker went to Cheddar Cave and took a picture that was obviously a sculpture at Cheddar Cave, and so from then on it was like, okay, this has been debunked, but there are still people that are not quite sure, because the pictures that he took and that people have taken since then, like they look like an obvious statue, like a sculpture. They don't look real. But this first photo, it had a quality to it that looked real, or at least like it didn't have the obvious. Whoever had taken that picture did such a good job of, maybe it was like a different paint job or something, but like the textures and stuff looked real. Like the pictures that were taken later almost looked like they were like someone had recreated that image as to like as well as they possibly could, and it was a good representation of that original photograph, but it almost looked fake. So the question is whether that's the case, or whether this original photo was just of this sculpture, and it was just the only photograph of that sculpture for 10 years before someone else managed to get another one to kind of prove it. But anyways, so whether the information is correct or not, the Seas said that this was a real being, and some kind of like window faller type creature. So who knows whether the debunking is real or accurate, or whether the Seas are accurate in this case. It's always hard it's always hard when a case has been satisfactorily debunked, because at that point it just becomes toxic, right? Like the alien autopsy video.
Yes.
I'm going to be writing about that on the blog, sometime this year, but because that one was successfully debunked. But there are people, and I might become one of them, who are like, well, is the debunk really as good as it's made out to be? Basically,
I was always one of those people, Harrison, that thought that thing was real. I was like,
yeah,
I don't know if you remember that girl that went famous. She's like, that mother is not real. That one, yeah. I was like, that thing is real. Like, I don't know what else you guys are talking about, but that one, that motherfucker is real. So I was one of those people, and everybody thought I was crazy. But I'm starting to think I was right about that. I don't, and it's really fascinating, because the stuff that you're talking about really kind of leads into all the stuff that we've been talking about. It's like there's this there's this weird aspect to something where that the powers that be, or that the government, or whatever these other powerful individuals, entities that are humans and are government or whatever, want us to not understand. So they've always done things to kind of sway us away from these things. And one of the ways they sway us from these things is to debunk these subjects, and then be like, oh yeah, this guy's so crazy. I mean, it kind of happened to like Alex Jones. I mean, this is for a long time. They did stuff like this, like the first wave of people to go on YouTube and stuff like that was conspiracy theorists, especially about aliens, UFOs, aliens, all that kind of stuff. Like all the UFO channels, like years ago, they got rid of all of them. It was like a mass sweep. That's the first time Alex Jones got banned. Because you even go near the subject. I mean, this stuff was so taboo a few years ago. You couldn't talk about like the stream we're doing right now. Hell no. Like it would be immediately like, just strike channel, demonetized, whatever. But we went to a very, very taboo phase. And now we've come kind of like, as we were talking about on the stream, we've come to a point in time where I think things are developing, and I partly put this on I think AI. I know it sounds really weird, but I think that with the advent of social media and now AI going into like the future, it's going to be harder and harder to keep track of what's fake and what's not, and then make more fake things with AI versus like people actually going on the ground and noticing things. So it's just going to be a really fascinating aspect moving forward of how they're going to be incorporating AI into covering up for these manifestations or whatever they are. And I think it's just, I mean, we have to, I went off on a tangent here, but we have to get back on topic of, so there's a differences between the window fallers, and then there's other creatures like what we talk about, like Bigfoot. So expand on the difference between like Bigfoot and these hyperdimensional beings.
Right. So I'll finish up a little bit on window fallers. So one other aspect of the window faller is that it might be kind of limited to a geographic area, like I said, but this is one paranormal phenomenon that seems to be truly reflective of human consciousness. there's a theory like a Jungian theory about UFOs that they're a reflection or an expression of the the human unconscious and the archetypes of the unconscious. The C's would say that that's not really the case with UFOs, but that is somewhat the case with window fallers, and that the window faller will take a form kind of based on the images and fears and mentality of the people in that area. So that's why you get region and cultural specific monsters. Like, so you get chupacabra in Puerto Rico, and some areas, some similar geographic and cultural areas. And then that's why you get kind of the weird creatures that you find like in Malaysia or Indonesia, and swamp creatures, near swamps, and Bigfoot type creatures, because the C's basically, I can't remember if they said it explicitly or imply that there are basically like window faller type Bigfoot or Bigfoot type window fallers. And they gave one example. There's a video that you can find. It's linked to in the book, to YouTube and on the Cassiopeia Substack. And it's just a video filmed in a region of Russia. I can't remember which region, but it's these people in their car. Looks like it was probably taken in the 90s or maybe the early 2000s on like a crappy cell phone. But they're in the car and kind of like freaking out because this thing is chasing them, and the camera looks behind, and it just looks like this kind of like hulking like gorilla or ape type Bigfoot type creature that's kind of just like chasing after them. And if you
That's
like,
scary.
it would probably be pretty scary if you were in that car. But the video is not high quality, but you can tell it's something that's chasing them, whether it's an animal or whatever.
I don't know if
the
that's.
say it was, yeah.
I don't know if that's in the same video as this, but I did read the part where you said there was definitely like some guy that recorded one. So
yes,
we're gonna listen to the sound of the Bigfoot, you guys. I'm telling you right now, disclaimer. First of all, turn down your speakers, or if you're wearing headphones, turn it down. This is going to be one of the most horrific things you ever hear in your life. It is terrifying. I was like, if I heard that, I would be peeing my pants for sure. So here is this video that apparently has this dude captured the sound of the Bigfoot. You're going to be hearing it here now. So get ready, guys. Here we go.
On the Pacific Coast in Washington State, veteran hunter and Rockingham County police officer Kenny Cooper was driving along this road when he heard a weird noise.
I was coming down north on this road here, and I heard some noise screaming back in here. And all the time I was going along, he was screaming. And everybody in Washington County could hear it because I did have the police mic outside. So they were listening to whatever it was that I was hearing. And the noise that was coming from that creature is what was on the recorder here. We took that recording, we sent it into the lab to have it analyzed, and it came back that there's no metallic noises in the recording, indicating that it wasn't made by some kind of a machine. And they said there's no voice. No human has vocal cords enough to throw the high pitches and low pitches at the same time.
That is so creepy. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, you guys, like in the chat, when I say Harrison's done the work of the research to verify certain things. So he'll tell you something about the C said this, and this, or like whatever, this is what was referenced here or whatever. And then he'll give you the links to the YouTube links to go into. I wish I had kept that one, the one that you're talking about with the car chase. Is that in this video or is that another video?
No, it's another video, but it's the same article. Let me just see if I can find the keyword for that. Yeah. If you search on YouTube, Bashkortostan was the place in Russia. Search Russian Bigfoot chasing car.
Okay.
And the channel will be Bigfoot Tony.
Okay, I got it. Wait, is that the like the 32-second one we want, or is that the? No, that's not it.
Well,
Bigfoot
yeah,
Tony.
no,
That's
probably.
Like, this is 14.
There's probably a longer
long.
one where he analyzes it, but the video itself is only, I think, 30 seconds or something like that.
I got it here. Let me pull this up. There's an FBI warning on it. That's so funny. Okay. This is it. No, there's gotta be a part where he's. Is this it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think the whole video is him like stabilizing and
oh my
doing
god, it's
things.
probably this
So,
one.
yeah.
There he is.
Yeah, that might just be the still that he pulled out. But yeah, that's it.
Oh my god, that is so creepy.
Probably
for us to say yes or no.
Wait,
Okay,
there's
so
a
I think he's
video
going frame by
footage
frame at
though,
that
right?
point.
Okay, no, this one is
Yeah.
the video then. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Открой, пожалуйста, окно и телефон, чтобы четко было. Он все равно нас не догонят, он медленнее идет. И вот снимай, да, вот так вот. Господи. Все, окей, давай, снимаю. Только главное едь.
Oh my god! Oh my god, it's right there.
Он упал. Он упал. Ладно, все, едь, Лёш, что нам...
Oh my god, that's so
Всё, домой нет?
creepy.
Я домой.
Hey, Bigfoot Tony, yeah?
Oh my god, that is so creepy. I'm so creeped out.
Yeah, so then Bigfoot Tony goes through, the because it's shaky cam, right? So he goes through and pulls out the frames where you can kind of see its structure and its arms and things like that. So
Oh my god, that's freaking wild, man.
so anyways, the C said that was a window faller, just like a typical window faller. So just some kind of like being that was temporarily in our vicinity or in the vicinity of
What, this one or that?
That
Which one? Oh, this one.
that specific
so
video,
this-
yeah.
Oh my god. Okay.
But
Okay.
but to get into Bigfoot proper, so of course there have been like hundreds and thousands of Bigfoot sightings all over the world, really. Of course, there's the the Yeti in the Himalayas, and then Bigfoot I think Bigfoot was specifically the name for this type of being in like, I can't remember if it was like the Rockies or something, but then in Canada you've got Sasquatch. So different names for a similar type of being. Like
My neighbor saw it because you know how like I used to live in Canada. We lived in the Rockies. We lived next to a town called Hope, and Hope is like literally they have shrines to Bigfoot or like Sasquatch or whatever. My neighbor, when we lived there, claimed one night or like one day that he saw it, like, and he was terrified. I mean, this dude was like this old rancher dude too, like never, like he was like a conservative, like does not believe in this kind of shit. He came to like our house and he was like, he like knocked on the door and he's like, look, like it's gonna sound really fucking weird, but have you guys seen any weird creatures around? And we were like, no, like what are you talking about? And he's like, like I don't even know what I saw. I'm just like wondering, like I don't even know why I'm here. Like I think I saw it. And he was freaked out. Like the poor guy was just it was fucked up. But okay, sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So and that's a lot of people don't realize it is that's the majority of this type of experience. It's someone who doesn't believe in it, who probably had made fun of people for claiming they saw a similar thing until they see it for themselves. And then they're like, oh wow, it's actually real. And then they try to tell someone and then they find out that no one believes them. So a lot of times they don't say anything because they know that that's the response that they're going to get. But like I'd say probably the majority of people who are into any of these like individual topics is because they were like that and they had the experience for themselves, and they then were like on a quest to kind of understand what their own experience was. And Bigfoot's just one of them. So, like I said, tons of accounts of Bigfoot, but there were always these kind of anomalous Bigfoot accounts, because Bigfoot accounts are anomalous in and of themselves. But then when you look at the Bigfoot accounts, there are anomalous Bigfoot accounts where just something weird is going on. And that has led, well, in the last decade or so, there's been more and more openness among some Bigfoot researchers to the idea that there's something paranormal involved. This isn't just some kind of like, ape or hominid that is loose in the wild and has maybe just developed alongside humanity and in secret, and we just see them every once in a while. It's not just some like unknown species, that there's something paranormal involved. And probably the best source for this is Stan Gordon. He wrote a book in like 2010 called Silent Invasion on, I think it's called like the UFO Bigfoot connection in Pennsylvania or something like that. And so he's been a UFO and a kind of paranormal researcher for decades and decades and decades. And he wrote this book on all of the Bigfoot sightings that are tied in some way to UFOs. And it's not as rare as you think. And the connection has irked a lot of people. Like the UFO people are like, oh, Bigfoot, we don't want to get into Bigfoot. And then the Bigfoot people are like, oh, UFOs, that's just too much. We're not, that. Yeah. And so, but the two seem to be connected. And so Stan Gordon was like, here are all the cases. It looks like they're connected. Linda Moulton Howe, who was a big time news video journalist, news station journalist in like the 70s. She started researching cattle mutilations for a story, and that kind of set her on a journey of getting into all this stuff. Now she just does just weird weather and alien and conspiracy stuff on her channel, Earth Files. And she found the same thing. Oh, there are these cases where UFOs and Bigfoot seem connected, including some cases where, well, sometimes UFO or close encounter witnesses, people who have seen a UFO close up, see aliens and Bigfoot, in the same scene. Sometimes there are people that see Bigfoot on UFOs. Like there's
the fascinating part. There's a fascinating part to that aspect. Also, is that like how I was saying that there's a big reverence of. It's not even reverence. It's actually quite fearful. Like the native population in British Columbia are very, very fearful and like kind of not. They're very just not. They're not really down with the Sasquatch. Like, it's not like this, like, nice creature that like hangs around or whatever. They kind of fear it. And there's a lot of stories going like hundreds and hundreds of years back of missing people, specifically missing people associated with Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and the idea that this creature, like whatever it is or whatever it does, people go missing when it's around. And sometimes they're back and sometimes they're not. But usually when they're back, they're completely different people, they say, and whatever experience they've done, they have been through something that has changed them in some aspect or another. So I think that's part of the reason that I was always really fascinated with Bigfoot. It was because it was such a big cultural thing in Canada where, and I knew a lot of Native people that would tell me these stories about like this creature. And I always found it so fascinating that it goes so far back. Like this isn't something like, that it just came along in our modern era. It goes back like hundreds and hundreds of years. And I always found that really interesting and fascinating. And now what you're saying, it kind of starts really making sense with the disappearances when you kind of start putting that UFO aspect to it. Now, back then, they weren't really kind of cluing into that as much. But when you say it, and when you start really kind of digging deeper into like what it is, why the connection's there, it starts to become really like, it blows your mind a little bit.
And like, so this is kind of more of a tangential connection, but if we look at missing 411 cases, David Paulides' work, so these are people that go missing most often permanently and without a trace in national parks, for the most part, but not always. He's got two documentaries, one, or what are they? Or maybe am I confusing? he's definitely got like missing 411, the UFO connection or something like that. And I believe one of his other ones, if it's not exclusively about Bigfoot, there might be references to Bigfoot, but at least there are a handful of cases that Paulides presents, oftentimes with children who went missing, like almost typical 411 case, but then they got returned. And usually when a missing 411 victim gets returned, they have like no real memory of what had happened to them. And but sometimes when the kids come, they've got a vague memory of something that happened. And several of the kids were like, oh, well, a bear picked me up and carried me to its lair basically, and fed me, and then brought me back or something like that. But they're describing what can't actually be a bear, like that it was walking on its on its back two legs, and it was carrying the the kid. And like basically there are several indications that Bigfoot are involved in at least a subset or a small portion of missing 411 cases. And there's another subset of missing 411 cases that involve UFOs. And then you look at Stan Gordon's work on the UFO Bigfoot cases in in Pennsylvania. You look at Linda Moulton Howe's cases. And so what the C's say is that Bigfoot proper, isn't your typical window faller. It is an actual kind of human-like species. Now, I'm drawing a bit on the raw material too here. A human-like species, in the sense of a real species of being, probably with human-like intelligence, at least a similar intelligence that humans have, but that they are essentially errand boys for different species of aliens, that they'll drop Bigfoot in the forest or somewhere to do a job for them, maybe to retrieve some materials, as in maybe kids or people. And they're like slaves or errand boys for other species. So a lot of Bigfoot fans probably wouldn't like that explanation for what Bigfoot's up to, but
no,
I'm just
I mean, I didn't because
because
I always liked I liked Bigfoot. I was like, he's cute, and like he's like a big bear, like whatever. But then you kind of start to realize, okay, maybe he's not cute, and he's like kidnapping people for like this, the other creatures, the ones that are like maybe projecting themselves as the MIB creatures or whatever. And whatever these nefarious creatures are doing, somehow they're using this other creature as kind of like their slave or errand boy or whatever to do bad things, mostly bad things, because it's not good things that they're doing. But okay, so let's fast forward a little bit, because we're running out of time and I wanted to get into a little bit of political phonology, but
sure.
I guess, what is your biggest takeaway from like all of this research that you've done, like all into the paranormal and all of these things that that you've accumulated in your mind? What is your biggest takeaway, and would you recommend people getting into like something like channeling themselves so that they can kind of see for themselves, or how would even one get into this aspect of work, and what is your biggest takeaway of it all?
Okay, well, I'll do the second question first. The second part of the question, I would say I don't recommend it. If it sounds like something you really want to get into, I'd say do spend the next 5 years researching everything you can about it, and then see if you still want to do it. And if you still want to do it, great, and then try it out. But I would say what do you really want? Do you just want to have some fun? In which case, still, you probably would want to do some research to make sure you're doing something fun in in a way that won't totally mess you up. Okay. So I'll leave that there. And then as for like my biggest takeaway, I'd probably say that I'll try to make it as general as possible, because there are a lot of details in in the book, and many that aren't in the book, or at least might be in a future book. And I'd say that any of those individual details, could be right or wrong. Who knows? It's hard to know for sure. But I'd say that if we look at the big picture, I'd say the big picture is that there is a phenomenon or several phenomena that are highly likely to be real, that humanity doesn't understand, that some people might have a better understanding of than others, but that has the potential to totally change the way that we understand the world. And that it's important because not only does it have implications for how we might see the world or understand ourselves, is that there could be kind of like a more existential problem here, because if a lot of this stuff is real, then there are implications for how we proceed with it. It's not just a fun, interesting thing. There could be real stakes involved. If you can look at there's a UFO researcher, David Jacobs. He was a historian, like a professor of history, I believe, and he got into UFOs. I think his PhD thesis was on like UFO history for early part of the mid 20th century, up until the 80s, I believe, or 70s. And he got into abduction research, and he kind of retired from the field. But he retired from the field because he was so distressed about the future of humanity if they didn't realize what was going on. And he was basically convinced that there was basically a global takeover going on, and that we were helpless to do anything about it because no one would take it seriously. Because imagine, like, you're the literal like street preacher or crazy person on the street being like, aliens are taking over, right? That's kind of how people saw, even people in the UFO world, that's how they saw David Jacobs at the end of his career, because he was like, people, this is a planetary invasion, and you guys are all like just having fun and arguing about all this trivial stuff. Meanwhile, we might lose our planet. So I have a lot of sympathy for David Jacobs. I don't totally agree with his take on everything, but I think he was in the right direction. And at the very least, that is a possibility that will have to be entertained if we take this stuff seriously. And by all indications, we should take it seriously. And there are very highly placed people all over the place, like in government and intelligence and the military, who are taking it that seriously, who have taken it that seriously. And that might be the reason that they don't want to tell people about it, is because they might just imagine some like 5-star general, or like, an ex-president, or just a really top person in American politics and the American like executive branch coming forward and being like David Jacobs and saying, hey, they're taking over, we're losing our planet. Maybe they've already taken over. You'd look like you'd look like a crazy person, and if anyone believed you, then it would just be like, well,
what would be pandemonium? Yeah, exactly.
Well, maybe not. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's what they think, though. They do think that if people find out, that it would be some sort of pandemonium, or like, people would just go crazy and there'll be just anarchy, and then they'll lose complete control, and they just can't have that. I think that's a big aspect of it. Why they want to suppress this information, and what have been wanting to for a long time. But things are just changing now with social media and everything like that, and technology improving more and more every day. I think we're just we're on a precipice of something else. But that kind of leads me into what I want to kind of end the interview with. We kind of started out by talking about this book a little bit, Political Panorology, which you've worked on. But I personally kind of fell out of the, like, as much as this stuff fascinates me and I love, the woo woo and all the, high strangeness things, topics and everything like that. At a point in my life, I came to a realization kind of like, well, we have been taken over. We've been taken over. But the invasion has been successful completely, and the aliens are these creatures called the psychopaths. Like I really believe that essentially they've it's an invasion of the body snatchers in a way where they kind of they have taken over certain individuals, or however you want to call it, or helping them become this other aspects of themselves more and more and more, through polarizing them, or basically like having like psychopaths in very prominent places of power that are affecting people's lives. And they also are in your daily life, or like on a daily basis. It doesn't, the whole idea that the psychopath was only people that are mass murderers and are basically like, Jeffrey Dahmers of the world or whatever, was completely crushed for me when I read this book, and when I started to really look into the idea of psychopathy and pathology and all of these things. So I want you to kind of expand a little bit on how this actually leads to that hyperdimensional aspect, like, because they are using these tactics to kind of, hide this other aspect. So speak a little bit on that, please.
Yes. So Lobachevsky, who wrote Political Ponerology, he stuck in his book to psychology and politics, right? So he had his very kind of scientific way of looking at things, but he was at least open to what he might have called demonic or demonological interpretations. He was a Catholic, so he was open. He was at least open to a kind of supernatural explanation, even if he didn't touch it, with a 10-foot pole when writing his book. I don't care, I'm not a scientist, so I will freely go, wade into those waters. And I've written a couple articles kind of getting in that direction on my Ponerology Substack, where I think it's totally possible that there's an overlap. And the two worldviews, the kind of woo mystical kind of channeling paranormal worldview and the kind of scientific worldview presented in Ponerology, there's definite compatibility. And the direction I kind of take that is that, I'll go back to something in the raw material, because it kind of serves as the foundation for stuff that's in the Seas material and for stuff that was in Ponerology too, in a different way. This was in an article that I just put up recently. I think the title of the article was, I think it was the one called The Orion Union, which was on Cassiopeia Substack just in the last few weeks. And in it, there's a quote, I think it might be a quote or a paraphrase from the raw material, but what they basically said is that the evil aliens, they called them the Orion group, because again, from the region of that's part of the night sky of the Orion constellation, and that's where all the bad guys came from. That's a tradition that traces back to some of the first like alien and contactee channeling back in the 50s. So, but anyways, what they said was that the way that the fourth density, or these alien beings, this kind of intergalactic empire works, is that they target planets for essentially a kind of takeover. What they want is basically they want to acquire that planet for themselves and integrate their population into their worldview, their social structure. And that has to do with a bunch of other kind of metaphysical ideas, but that's the rough idea. And Ra said the way they do that is by going to finding a new planet, establishing an elite, and then using that elite to enslave the population by instituting some kind of like totalitarian government. So right there, you have a link between very real historical political realities on our planet, and a possible kind of cosmic interpretation and another layer of what might be beneath and behind that reality. So when you look at totalitarianism in the 20th century and the kind of emerging totalitarianism that we've seen over the last decade or so, and the kind of resistance to that totalitarianism, which has been successful to some degree in certain places. But when you just look at the phenomenon of the totalitarianism itself, and which Lobachevsky called pathocracy, because he identified that the key feature of totalitarianism was psychopathy. Is that the most important people in this political social structure kind of thing that's going on are clinical high functioning psychopaths. Then what happens when you put those two worldviews together? Okay, so you have a psychopathic government, an elite that is enslaving a population, like let's say that like the communists in in the USSR, or like all the communist countries in the 20th century. So what's actually going on there? Well, that might be a reflection of a higher dimensional motive and operation. And that's pretty terrifying to think about. That like the psychopaths on like in these political structures are essentially kind of almost extensions or puppets of a higher intelligence. And there's all kinds of directions that of course we could get to in that kind of philosophical worldview or way of looking at the way the world is structured. But that's kind of the direction I was going to in those two articles that I mentioned. I think one of them is called like Psychopathy and the Supernatural or something on my Ponerology Substack. And so yeah, that might be. I think the way you put it is that there's a good insight there, that that it might be true in more than one way, that the certain type of human, and the certain type of human that creates totalitarian governments and enslaves populations is kind of a direct representative of maybe something a bit weirder.
Yeah, otherworldly. And the closest I think we came to in our lifetime was COVID, because in COVID, it was definitely something else. Like, and I don't know if you went through it, because we were in different parts of the world, and different parts of the world experienced it differently. But there was this kind of like mass hysteria that happened, that it kind of put everyone under like in a form of hypnosis almost, especially if you're just not aware of certain things. So it became something like, honestly, I felt like I was living in some sort of science fiction novel for a while, especially like the early times where they just shut everything down and there was like nobody around. There was silence. I remember I was sitting in my backyard, Harrison, at one point, and because I live in the tropics, I live in Cancun, so you're always kind of constantly hearing birds, like those tropical birds are always singing here and everything. And there was a moment where everything went silent, like it was like a silent thing, and there was no car sounds, there was no birds singing, there was no anything, there was not like you could hear a pin drop if you were listening to the sounds around. And I kind of thought to myself, I was like, this is almost like being in purgatory in a way. Like it felt like I was so disconnected, and I felt so like my mind went into like this place where like I feel like did China drop the nuke, or the North Korea drop the nuke? We are all dead, and we're kind of like lost in this purgatory place now, where like we're just dreaming all this at this point. That's how weird that time was, because it really was something else. And for a while I was scared that we're not going to snap out of it, Harrison. I thought that this might be it. Like this might be that end of our what we perceive to be freedom, because like we came close during like the early aughts with like what happened with 9/11 and what happened with the totalitarian regime just kind of starting to take over with like the Patriot Act and all of these things that started to kind of seep into it slowly into our daily lives. But this was on a massive scale, man. And I didn't know if it was going to end, or if it was ever like if people were ever going to wake up. And I think that I was a little surprised they did. How did you feel about that? Because I was a little surprised that they finally actually kind of snapped out of it. Because it was hard to break that spell.
Yeah. I kind of have similar thoughts. I don't have any answers. The only thing I can think of is maybe like an analogy. It's like what's currently going on with with Iran, right? There are certain people that really, 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 really want a war with Iran.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, we want it. Oh, they seem to be going along with it. And then, like, just recently, like Hegseth, and Gabbard and Vance were like, no, we're actually not going to go along with these plans. And
Yeah.
it's like, but it'll keep coming and keep coming, and the pressure is there.
Mhm,
So it's
mhm.
like that. It's like the same thing. That's kind of a microcosm of what's been going on globally. It's like there are people that really, 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 really want global totalitarianism, and they're going to push for it and take the opportunity to try to institute it. And then, maybe they get a little bit too much resistance, or it just doesn't work out. So the people manage to get back some control, but they're just going to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. And it's just going to be this cycle until something gives, right? Either they
Mhm.
win or they lose. But but this kind of constant back and forth, I don't think it's sustainable. So we're
No.
just gonna have to wait and see. But yeah, I don't think that. I think there was too much resistance, and they weren't able to basically make it stick.
Yeah,
There seems to
it
be,
almost
yeah,
felt like they played their hand too early. Like it was
yeah,
like it was just
and too
it
hard,
felt
yeah.
yeah, it was just like they went a little bit too hard, too fast. That's what she said. And it was just kind of it was over before they wanted it to be. But yeah, it's interesting that you bring up Iran because like I'm Persian and I have my entire life Harrison has been basically kind of waiting for that war, that inevitable war between Iran and the United States and or Israel. Like, I mean, later on in my life, I was more introduced to the other aspect, like the third hand, which is Israel and how much they want the war with Iran. But it's always been like that. My entire life has been like, oh, this is going to happen at some point. I don't want it to happen. I really hope it doesn't. But I what I want to end this show on though is that I want to end this show on this might be impossible, but on a bit of a positive note. And the reason I want to do that is because we haven't connected for a while, but I also do a show on Fridays and it's called Infinite Hope, where I kind of try and balance this show out by reminding people that there's still good things going on in the world, that there's still good humans, there's good people, there's kindness, there's all sorts of things that battle these creepy creatures, these creepy crawlies, these whatever they want, this higher consciousness that might be trying to take over our world. That there is also a force of light that's fighting it. And I guess I want you to kind of maybe give your take about that. Like, do we have hope? Like, is there hope in this world for this world to kind of come out of or
Yeah.
get away from these creatures and these disgusting things that are happening on this earth?
Yep. I would say first, on an individual level, there's a chapter that is in the book on alien abduction, and it's specifically, the chapter is on resistance to alien abduction. But the principles in that chapter can be extrapolated to, to a wider situation, and not just to apply to an abduction scenario. The principles are universal, basically, is what I'm saying. And this will be in volume 2, probably at the end of volume 2. But one of the things that is in the channeled material in the seas is about the nature of these beings, is that for all of the like technological power that they might have, and mental, psi powers, that they are limited to, and they're limited by what the seas had called wishful thinking. And this seems to be a quality of psychopaths as well, is that they are so self-centered that they don't see what they don't want to see. And so they focus and hyper focus on basically the way they wish reality were, and the way they to the exclusion of reality, right? So when you block out reality, it makes it difficult to navigate. So basically they have an Achilles heel. And for what it's worth, in this material, they say that, for all of their plans and all of their grand schemes and all of this totalitarianism and stuff, in the end, it'll all fail because of wishful
Yay.
thinking. Now, so how much trust can you put into just some some channeled material, right? But
Right.
there's it's there, and at the very least, I think that if we just ignore that, we can come to a similar conclusion on our own, and
Mhm.
basically just that it's kind of like with the COVID thing.
Yeah.
Like you said, they played their hand. As long as there are people that are, well, I won't kind of try to like put a rosy put it to a rosy picture or anything like that. I'll just say that, like, empirically, it looks like people are getting pretty good at identifying the next new thing as it comes and being like, no, we're not going to go along with it. It's going to be hard to try the same thing twice, and it seems like each time it happens, instead of fewer people being able to see through it, it's probably going to be more people that see through it. So I think that's the biggest hope. And if there's any reality to any of this channeled material, then we can place it in that context too, and be like, well, maybe that'll apply there as well. I would say that one of the most important things for this specific topic is that I do really think it's important to have a more widespread knowledge and understanding of it. Like, hopefully, I'm not going to get my hopes up, but I would hope that guys like David Grush, the UFO whistleblower who talked to Ross Coulthard a couple of years ago, I think that pretty much everything he said rings true to me. And he's working with Congress right now to have new hearings, call in hostile witnesses, and try to get stuff out. I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think the best thing would be for more accurate information to come out from an official source, like even if it has to be pulled against their will out of the executive branch, and to get that to the people. The more people that know, that have a more accurate awareness of what's going on, the less likely whatever these beings are to succeed in whatever they want to do, because they operate by deception. They operate in the shadows, and it's not just the government covering things up. If these beings wanted to be totally open and transparent, they could be, but they're not, and that's a red flag. So that's what I'd say. I'd say that there are reasons to hope. There are reasons to think that how might Alex Jones put it, that the the human race will be victorious, or something like that.
That was pretty good impression.
Yeah,
that was pretty good.
I don't think that's just I don't think that's just wishful thinking. I think it's a real possibility. Wishful thinking would be to just assume that it's going to happen that way. But basically, we have a responsibility to learn as much as possible and be prepared, and to have the will to resist something that we see as wrong.
I think you really hit a note there for me as well, because even when it comes to like this woo woo stuff and everything, I think one of the biggest a hopeful thing is to just knowing about this stuff, and like what other people have gone through, or like their experiences, or just like reading about like these alien abductions or whatever, and just having that knowledge kind of already a little bit creates that shield. Because I feel like if you're just totally oblivious to it, you're much more likely to become a target or whatever, if you will. And I think that kind of stuff helps as well, which is why you guys should definitely buy the book and read it. Consume these types of works for yourself, and just see where, make up your own minds about whether this stuff is real or not. Maybe it'll just be a fun read for you. Either way, you should definitely support Harrison here. He's done a lot of good work. Beyond Disclosure is available on Amazon. Harrison, you have also a YouTube channel and other things, if you want to plug those before we leave. I've been dropping the link for the book, but the other links are also in the description for Harrison, so make sure you guys follow him. But please, you have the floor to plug your channel and anything else you want to.
Yeah, so the links to my Substacks, I've already mentioned them. Well, I've mentioned my Substacks already, Ponerology and Cassiopeia, so you can check those out. My Twitter should be in there somewhere. It's at TDarmTech, where talk about you. That's like my strictly UFO Beyond Disclosure account. And then my YouTube channel is Mind Matters. Haven't done videos in a while, but we'll be starting up again in the next week or two, and probably with some similarly themed stuff. I'm actually going to have one of the talks I have scheduled is Joshua Cutchin, who wrote a book on the paranormal Bigfoot connection, a series of two books, or a two book series called Where the Footprints End, I believe, and a bunch of other books on. He's big into fairy folklore and teasing out the connections between the fairy faith hypothesis and the ET hypothesis, and how they both might be descriptions of the same other phenomenon, which is what we're kind of calling hyperdimensional hyperdimensional beings or aliens. So he's really cool. His books are great, and so you can check him out on Mind Matters. Probably in a week or two we should have the show up.
Nice. And that's the channel right there, you guys. Make sure you go and subscribe. Also, I had a couple of super chats here from Russell Hall. Thank you, Russell, for the 2. Here in NC, we have not deer. I don't know what that means. Is that some type of
well, I'm in NC, but I'm not a native NC. But I presume that means just everything that's not deer.
Not deer.
Wildlife. I'll have to look it up or talk to one of my hunter friends.
Also, with regards to that call, the Bigfoot call, he's saying that Anna is a mutual friend of ours, like Russell and I's, and she's another content creator. And he's saying for $2, I think that's Anna's mating call. That's mean, Russell. That is really, really mean. That's a mean thing to say. But Harrison, thank you so much for coming by. And also, you are totally invited to come to my good news show if you're like, you know what, this was way too terrible. I don't this was an awful stream because I don't want to talk about negative things and I need some sort of positive news. You are totally welcome to join me any Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern for Good News Infinite Hope, where we talk about good things and how humanity is actually capable of doing good things, and that deep down inside we're capable of it. It exists. Good exists. That's why I do that show. So you're more than welcome to join me. Russell Holford too says not deer are what? Cryptid.
So basically you see a cryptid out there and you say it's not deer. Something like that.
Not deer. Russell, you're so weird. Thank you for being you, Russell. Okay, you guys. Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. We also I have the Good News channel up that is going well as well. We got we've been having a good week over there, so go and subscribe there as well. That's my other channel. Everything else, you guys know me. I'm Nina Infinity. This is my main channel, and this was like a conversation, Harrison. We got to do it again soon, okay? We got so much more to talk about. I feel like we only touched the surface. So until next time, you guys, special thanks to those of you who super chatted, became a member, gifted memberships, all the good stuff. Thank you for supporting the channel the way that you do. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody. Bye.